Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Margaret Huber. I am EPIC's Communications and Campus Engagement Manager. Welcome to our third Career Series event. Happy New Year also, and welcome back to this quarter. So today we have Josh, and he's going to talk about his role and what he does at Global Energy Monitor. But first, I'm going to give a little overview of some stuff. First is the overview of EPIC. If you are not unfamiliar with the Energy Policy Institute here at UChicago, we act as an interdisciplinary hub for energy and environmental research across the entire university. So we combine the insights of economists, policy analysts, and business experts with the technical expertise of engineers and scientists. So our faculty work together to bring robust cross-cutting research to the forefront of the global energy debate. So today, we are going to have about a 30-minute moderated Q&A led by myself, and then we will have approximately 30 minutes to chat with the audience. So for that, we are going to ask that you guys raise your hand during that Q&A portion. You'll be able to do that by your name in the attendee dropdown. When I click on you, it will ask you to unmute yourself. You will need to accept that, and then you'll be able to speak and ask your question. And I will unmute you when you're done. Please do state your name, and if you're still in school, where you are in school, and then we'll get back to the convo. So if you do have any technical issues, there is the Q&A box. You can pop that question in there. Otherwise, the chat has been disabled. So that you can ask your questions in person. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to have Josh introduce himself, and then we will get started with our questions. Okay, hello, Josh.
Hello, thank you, Marguerite, and thank you to EPIC for hosting me. It's great to be here today, and great to see so many people online. Thank you all for being here. My name is Josh Kruskal. I am the Director of Finance and Operations at Global Energy Monitor. And I'm a 2020 graduate of the Harris School of Public Policy at UChicago.
Great. All right. So let's start first a little bit with your job at Global Energy Monitor. First, can you explain a little bit about what Global Energy Monitor is, and then a little bit more about what that you do?
Sure. So for folks who don't know, well, first of all, I would encourage you to check out our site. We just launched a brand new website on Monday. It's globalenergymonitor.org. A lot of good info on there and more getting added by the day. So GEM is a data and research organization that takes a magnifying glass and tries to examine different aspects of the global energy network. Everything from resource distribution, so where is coal and oil and natural gas in the ground, who's extracting it and how much, where is it getting transported and how is it getting converted into energy, and where is that energy actually being used to do work. These are all massive problems, and there's a bunch of different organizations working on them, but we try to tackle parts of those parts of the problem that others aren't. What we're probably best known for is something called the Global Coal Plant Tracker, which looks at coal plants around the world. We have a big map of them up on our website. You can check it out. All the information is open source, available for download if anyone's doing research. I would encourage you to check out our database. With the coal plants, we look at what coal plants are running, what their output is, where they are, what their status is. Are they recently built? Are they in the process of getting, are they getting decommissioned? Have they been decommissioned and out of service for a while? It's a really great map. When the first time I'd heard about GEM, I was familiar with this map and their work. I looked at the map. It's really cool. You can zoom in on a place like Chicago or a place like the East Coast where I am from, and see where your power comes from. And that's something I think a lot of us take for granted. Power just comes out of a socket in the wall. But to actually see physically what that network looks like is fascinating. And for me, is a really exciting part of my job at GEM.
That sounds really cool. So as your role, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do on a typical day? What are your main responsibilities? Do you oversee anyone? Anything like that?
Sure. So my job is Director of Finance and Operations, and it's pretty much broken down the middle just like that. So on the finance side, there's a few different things I do in both buckets, but on the finance side, at a high level, it's things like thinking about the entire year-long budget for the organization, how much money are we bringing in total, what's going out. Are our programs funded? Do we have budgets set up for individual energy programs we're running? So we have separate budgets for our coal programs. Oil and gas we actually combine into one program, and then we run a few smaller programs as well. We're starting up some new programs. We're thinking about starting a nuclear research division, as well as renewables, which are a huge area that I can't believe we're not already involved in, but that's coming quite soon. Still on the finance side, getting down to more of the kind of nitty-gritty day-to-day work. It's making sure our bills get paid, making sure our vendors are taken care of, and making sure our staff payroll is processed when that goes out. On the operations side, it's a lot of our internal systems. So, our staff are our biggest resource, and I think it's a pretty cliche thing to say, but I think a lot of organizations, it's the same case. And we have to make sure they're taken care of, that folks know what they're working on. I manage a big multi-project calendar that looks at who's working on what, when, with whom, for how long, which helps the folks in the leadership team to get a sense of who's going to be available, what's coming up in the pipeline. It gives us a sense of when the busy times, when might there be a lull, and when can we use a lull to make people a bit more busy and assign them more work. We do try to maintain a good work-life balance, but because these are such pressing and urgent issues, there's a lot of work to do, and we're excited to be working on it, but we don't want to overwork people too much. And then a bunch of miscellaneous stuff. GEMS is still a pretty recent organization. We only started, I think we were founded back in 2007, but we only became what we are now, an independent 501c3 nonprofit in 2017. And with any small growing nonprofit, there's a lot of work to go around, and so those two buckets I described are most of what my day entails, but there's always things that pop up, projects and things that need attention that I help out with. And I think a lot of people on our team try to be flexible and pick up slack wherever it exists.
All right. So can you talk a little bit about how the organizational structure is set up? Justin and I were talking a little bit earlier about who's working remotely right now. So how do you work with teams, and how does that work, especially when you are on different time zones and stuff like that?
Sure, yeah. The time zones it's tricky. So GEM's based in California. They started there, and they're kind of original core staff are a lot in the Bay Area. I'm here in Boston, so 3 time zones ahead. So I wake up and have a few kind of nice quiet hours before everyone else pops online. And then by the time they're all frantically emailing each other in the afternoon, I'm ready to end my day. So there's a little bit of a gap, which is actually not the worst thing in the world. We also have staff in Europe and in Australia. We're working with contractors in Turkey and India and all over. So it's a really globally connected organization. So at a time when we're all pretty much confined to our homes, it's actually a really great way to sort of feel like you're still connected with something bigger out there. My kind of day-to-day experience of GEM is that of a pretty flat organization. I don't see much of a hierarchy because I'm just sending emails to people. No one has, the corner office. We're all pretty much just CC'd on the same email threads. And that actually feels, it makes things feel like pretty equal, which I actually really like. I can describe the hierarchy, but I'll just preface it by saying it doesn't really feel like this in the day-to-day lived experience of the group. So we do have a board of directors, which is who oversees our whole operation. And then we have an executive director, a man named Ted Nace. He's my boss. Ted reports to the board of directors. I then work for Ted, and we're on a leadership team, which involves myself, a director of communications, as well as some other roles we're looking to fill actively at the moment. We also have program directors. So I mentioned those different kind of project areas. So coal, oil and gas, which are combined, nuclear, renewables, and then some other ones we're working on. Under those people, we have the bulk of our staff, which are researchers, analysts, people who actually are doing the on-the-ground work of finding data, sorting it, cleaning it, putting it on a map, analyzing it, publishing reports, and then working with other organizations as we work towards the goals of our work. Like I mentioned, we also have a lot of contractors we work with. So we're a small group, and we sort of leverage our resources by working with people on the ground closer to the places that we're trying to investigate, who are more familiar with those places and have a much better grasp of what's going on than we ever could. So we'll often hire people on a short-term basis to go and tell us what's going on with natural gas in Turkey, for instance, and they'll be able to tell us, and that's great because then we can move on with the rest of our project. And like I said, it is really cool just to be able to have that connection and have an excuse to email somebody from Turkey or India or wherever, and have that connection. it's not like something I ever had before in any of the jobs I've had in the past. And so this is a really special thing that I've been able to do for the last few months. We have a lot of sort of, and you asked about teams, we have a lot of sort of internal teams set up. Some of them are sort of pre-configured within those project areas. Because my role is kind of more of the administrative side of things, I sort of jump in and out of those groups as needed. But then there's a lot of sort of internal project teams, so not energy projects, but for instance, developing our new website, that was a big group effort where a lot of people were involved. I was involved very closely working with our designer, with our tech staff to get it up and running. So Monday was a big success for us. Now, of course, we're finding out all the bugs and we're trying to get those patched as quickly as we can, but we do have that team set up and that's working really efficiently. I think the way we've been able to work so effectively together is definitely by just staying on top of our inboxes and responding to emails. I think we have a culture where we really respect each other's time and want to make sure people can kind of keep doing what they need to do. So we don't want to be the thing that slows them down. So I try to maintain as clean of an inbox as I can. It's not always possible. And, if I'm a few time zones ahead of somebody and it's the end of my day and I sign off for, the next 12 hours, I might miss an email and be 12 hours late in responding to it. And that's just unfortunate, but to have some semblance of work-life balance, it's necessary. But typically, yeah, within 24 hours, if I can try to get back to someone's email, I will.
Definitely. So can you walk us through your path to GEM and how you got there?
Sure. So I grew up in Boston. I went to Middlebury College as an undergraduate, which is in Vermont, where I majored in international politics and economics. After I got my BA, I came back to Boston and I worked for a while in pro bono consulting, which was my first exposure to the nonprofit sector. And the nonprofit sector, it's people have split opinions, and it really depends kind of what you're doing. And there's a lot of different types of nonprofits, obviously, out there, ranging from kind of the small, struggling ones to large universities and hospitals. So it's a very broad sector, and I think I've kind of found the part in that spectrum that I like. But anyway. I eventually went on after a while working for this pro bono consulting firm to work for one of their consulting clients, which was a group called EcoLogic Development Fund. And they're a great kind of micro NGO, and they work in Central America doing small scale, local, community supported sustainable development projects. And these are things like working with local indigenous groups to manage community greenhouses, to grow young tree saplings to plant in deforested and degraded landscapes, to help better bind the soil, to better retain water, and over a period of 10 or 20 years to revitalize that landscape. Similar things in a coastal setting, right? So in places like Belize, planting mangroves up and down the coast to protect those coastal areas from the effects of rising seas and storms, etc. So really cool projects. I'm really excited about the environment, and that's sort of what set me down this course. I also worked for a few other groups. I worked for a group called WEEMA International, which does similar projects, but in East Africa. And I was able to go to Ethiopia with them on a project co-sponsored by the Himalayan Cataract Project to do some on-the-ground work there, which is really cool. I took a little time off and did some traveling before starting at UChicago, but I came to the Harris School in 2018. My program there was the Masters of Science in Environmental Science and Policy, which I don't believe they offer anymore. I think it was put on hold while I was there, and now I don't know if it's coming back. But all of the classes are still there. All the professors are very much still there, as well as the connection to Argonne National Lab, which I can talk about later today. But so yeah, I would definitely encourage those of you who are in the Harris School or other similar programs to check out the university's science offerings. If you're interested in working in energy or the environment, I think at least having some science underpinning to what you're doing, I think is critical and really gives you a leg up when it comes to looking for work or just talking to people in the field about what's going on. And then, of course, after I graduated from Chicago, I actually before I graduated, I was in touch with Ted, my boss now. When the time came to job hunt, this was sort of the early days of the pandemic, and I was not at all sure what I was going to do, where I was going to be. I was actually looking for remote roles because they offered a lot of flexibility, and that I think has proven to be the right decision. Ted was great. We were talking for a long period before he finally offered me a job, and I sort of designed this role based on what the kind of work I'd done in the past had been. what I was interested in doing after, developing new skills at the Harris School and across the university, and also where I was interested in taking my career in the future, and also what GEM's needs were at the time as an organization. So, starting out, there was a lot of boxes that need to be checked. GEM is growing quickly. There's a lot of things happening. And now we're sort of at this point where the workload is sort of plateauing. I think I have a much better sense of what I'm doing. I think GEM as an organization has a better sense of where it's going. So I think we're still far away from the organization maturing. That's still far off past the horizon. But I think we're finally getting a sense of what that might look like, and we're building partnerships that seem really stable. We're really getting some secure funding, which is really critical for any organization. And it's really an exciting time to be there, to be a part of that.
Last question before we move on to talking about your time at Harris. How did you find Ted? That's like, how did that relationship begin?
It was actually totally random. I saw something online and I sent him an email. This is actually something I've done before, and I can't offer it as advice I can fully endorse, but I'll often email people just to not necessarily inquire about a job, but just to kind of ask what's going on. Tell me about a project you're working on. The job I mentioned, EcoLogic, I got because I wrote to an alumni of my undergraduate college to ask what was going on, and this was a person who happened to be moving to Alaska in a few weeks. I didn't know this at all, but they were moving to Alaska. They needed somebody to step in and take their job over, so that was how that happened. Ted, I heard about GEM. I had been doing, I've been doing a lot of energy investigation and research while I was at Harris, and I was familiar with their trackers and some of their work. I sort of had a sense they were working on some new things, but I wasn't really sure who they were as an organization. So I wrote to him. I saw they were hiring. I was interested in that, but it was more sort of exploration in the beginning. We talked on and off for a few weeks before he finally, almost out of the blue, said, "Hey, would you be interested in look at this job description? We can tweak it if you like, but we would love to have you join the team." And that's more or less how I got where I am in GEM.
Awesome. Cold call or cold emailing can be very scary, but I guess it also works. So that's a great story.
It's scary. It's I think as a university student, you have a great excuse to do it because you're often already doing work or research in the areas that you're interested in. If people get an email from you and they get the sense that you're looking for something from them, that might send the wrong message. Even if you are, I think try to disguise it a little bit. Don't be disingenuous, but yeah, I mean, if these are issues you really do care about or are interested in and can kind of approach it as organically as possible, I think that's probably best. So that'd be my advice.
Absolutely. All right. So let's move on to your time at Harris and at UChicago. So while you were there, I know you were involved in a couple things at Harris, or at least the student government. So can you talk a little bit about what you did while you were there?
Right. So I was in the student government. I was the representative for my very small degree program. So it was I guess, disproportionate representation. We were the equivalent of a small state having its two senators, but there I was. I was also on HEA, which is the Harris Energy and Environmental Association, which is a great student group that do a ton of programming. And if you don't know about them already, I would encourage you to check them out. I was also involved with the Chicago Policy Review, which is another great group that if you're looking to practice your policy writing or writing just about issues that you care about, they're a great outlet for that. I did a bunch of other things on campus, all of which seems to be escaping me right now. I did have actually I had two campus jobs. I was a TA for a couple of classes. And I also worked for the university's Office of Civic Engagement, which is a big office at the administrative level of the college. But in Harris, they're working specifically on a project looking at local neighborhoods surrounding Hyde Park. So Washington Park over to the west, Woodlawn to the south, and they've probably since I left moved on to look at other neighborhoods as well. Looking at issues like housing and inequality, development, displacement, things like that. None of which were really issues. I'm interested in all those issues, but none of which I'd really worked with directly before. I had moved to Chicago for the first time in 2018. I thought, this would be a really great way to kind of get to know the city in a much more meaningful way, because as those of you who are familiar with Hyde Park know, it can be a bit of a bubble. So to be able to kind of press on the margins of the bubble a little bit and try to kind of learn more beyond those boundaries, I thought was really valuable.
And then what made you want to continue your education and attend graduate school, and what made you choose UChicago and Harris?
When I first started working right after finishing undergrad, I was pretty unhappy in that space. I had a job that, on paper looked great. It was what I wanted to be doing. It made the resume look good, and that was helpful, and that's important. But I was pretty dissatisfied with the actual content of the work, how I felt, just going in and coming out at the end of the day. I knew that there were issues out there that I really wanted to engage with more directly. And I don't want to, at all knock consulting. I think it's a great and necessary thing out there, and I think a lot of you are probably very interested in consulting. But there's definitely a lifestyle and demands on your time that come from it that aren't for everyone. So when I moved to EcoLogic, and this was the small NGO that I worked for afterwards, I felt much better there. I felt much better working more directly with issues that I cared about. It was at that point I really saw a path forward for myself, but to kind of move further along that path, I needed to invest time, invest myself in building a stronger foundation of knowledge and expertise in those subjects. I had studied a little bit about energy and the environment as an undergrad, but I was an economics major, so I could draw a supply and demand graph and apply it to anything, but so can every other economics graduate out there. So I wanted to dive a lot deeper into energy issues specifically and the environment. And Harris at the time offered this really great program, which stood out to me as soon as I saw it. I couldn't find a ton of information, so I wrote to some people, again, these cold emails, and I was able to find out more. Even while I was in the program, because the program at the time required me to go and take these science courses in departments outside of the Harris School, I would write to people in those departments asking about, just professors, at the around registration time, asking what was your class, what did your class involve? Could somebody without a very strong background in those science subjects be okay in taking that sort of class? And my experience has been that people tend to be very helpful and very open, and if you're curious about the thing that they've, in many cases, dedicated their lives working on, they're more than happy to share and to give time to talk to you. So after I made up my mind to go to grad school, the Harris program really stood out. I was excited to come, and it met so many of my expectations and exceeded so many of them in so many ways. I think I went into grad school just sort of anticipating the academic side of things, but not so much what it would provide in terms of extracurricular options and employments, connections. All of that I think was a really nice cherry on top. And I came out of my Harris experience, even though it was at a really tough time, and it was a tough time for all of my classmates, feeling very fortunate and as well set up to succeed going forward as I think I could have been.
Great. So then, do you have any advice for any courses that you think other students should take? Do you have a favorite course that you took while, a fond memory, a great exam that you had to take, anything like that?
No great exams, but I think, there's definitely a few courses I can suggest. When I started out at Harris, I'll just kind of run through it chronologically. This isn't in any particular order. Environmental economics is one, definitely a great kind of foundation course. Even just the core, I would say pay attention during the core. I know some people are eager to get through those core classes, and that's sort of the language and culture that's seem to emerge around those. And this is just at the Harris School, but for programs to do requirements, they're often required for a reason. And I would say pay attention, get as much as you can out of them, and then once they're out of the way, you can do what you like. Amir Jinnah's climate policy class, international climate policy, was really great, and I can recommend that. Anand Siddharshan teaches courses on international energy development, which were fascinating. I know I'm forgetting a few, but it's been quite a while since.
That's all right.
But and like I said, those science classes. So when I was at Harris, I was able to take sort of introductory level science classes in other departments, but also some classes that are more sort of elective courses for graduate students. So I took a class on community ecology in the Department of Ecology and Evolution, which is really cool. Has nothing to do at all with not nothing, but not very directly involved with what I'm doing now, but still really fascinating and a topic that I love to think about and read about on my own. I took random classes. I took a class in the astronomy or astrophysics department about planetary habitability, which looked at atmospheric systems and the weathering of rocks and the uptake of CO2. And I was trying my hardest to sort of apply it to the work I'm doing now. It's not, again, very relevant, but you can take the same formulas and models that apply on Mars and Venus and apply it to Earth, and they work just the same. So really cool stuff. Sort of gives you a bigger picture perspective on why, what's happening on Earth, and to sort of consider the carbon cycle on a much grander space and time scale. So yeah, so in addition to specific courses, definitely explore, read obscure corners of the course catalog, see what appeals to you, and if anything stands out, send an email just to confirm that it's what you're looking for.
The theme right now is send an email about stuff. So your time at Harris, you were also a Bartlett Fellow with EPIC, and you worked with Argonne National Laboratory. Could you talk a little bit more about your experience there?
Sure. So for folks who don't know, Argonne is a really incredible research institution, maybe 20, 30 miles southwest of the city of Chicago. And they're a federal research laboratory, part of the U.S. Department of Energy, and they're administered by or operated by UChicago. There's some formal connection. I'm not exactly quite sure how that works, but they are both part of the U.S. Department of Energy, and there's a very close UChicago connection. So when I was there, I encountered a lot of people with UChicago email addresses, and while on campus, there are a lot of people who have connections to Argonne. So there's a lot of kind of cross-pollination between the two. There's also a daily shuttle that runs back and forth, so that makes it easy to commute there during the summer. Argonne is a big campus, multiple buildings, each of which has its own sort of area of focus. They're probably best known for back in like the 1950s and 60s working on some of the nuclear technology that followed the Manhattan Project. So, after World War II was over, we were sitting with a bunch of uranium and had to kind of figure out what to do with it. So at Argonne, they developed some of the first nuclear reactors. They tested those not in suburban Chicago, but further out west, I think in Idaho. And a lot of the nuclear technology we have today, including things like nuclear submarines, all came from research done at Argonne. So a really cool history. Their nuclear mission is more or less wound down now. They do a lot of research in supercomputers and materials at the nanoscale. Really cool stuff that I don't know too much about, but it's fun just to be exposed. And they do also have an environmental science division, which is where I was based. I believe the director of the environmental science division is associated with EPIC. And that was actually how I met her at the time. I'm not actually sure if she's still involved, but that was how I initially got connected. And there are, I'm sure, a bunch of people with Argonne connections that are involved with EPIC right now as well. I reached out to them initially through my work with the Chicago Policy Review, which is the student journal at the Harris School, looking to do an interview just about what's happening at Argonne in the environmental science division, and it seemed really cool. And I wrote back to them a few weeks after the fact, saying, "Hey, by the way, do you have anything going on this summer that I might be able to help out with?" And they did, and I started talking, and then talked to a few more people, and eventually I also was simultaneously working on my Bartlett Fellowship application, which provided some great funding, which was very helpful for the summer. And then once the summer began, I was doing work on the Argonne campus. I was getting bussed out every day. There were long days, and it was a lot of work, and it was, I think, probably more than I anticipated going into it. But it was really fascinating stuff. And I was working on a project not so much on the energy side of things, more environment. We were looking at a specific watershed in Illinois, the Kaskaskia, which is in southwestern Illinois, and it feeds into the Mississippi, which then goes into the Gulf of Mexico. And the Gulf of Mexico, for those of you who know, there's a big hypoxic dead zone where there's nutrients that have come in. There have been blooms of algae and life isn't able to exist there as it does in other parts of the ocean. And a lot of that is from the inflow of nutrients, which in many cases come from the Mississippi, which in many cases come from these watersheds that feed into the Mississippi. And the origin of those contaminants is in many cases agriculture, and also runoff from urban sewage systems. So what we're looking at in this watershed was, would it be possible to work with farmers who grow crops and use fertilizers and things that leach into the soil and get into the water? Would it be possible to work with them to plant switchgrass and other crops that are hardy and can do well without fertilizers, and that also are able to take up pollutants from the soil and store it, And then would it be economically feasible to, at the end of the year, cut down that switchgrass and turn it into bioethanol, so a fuel, which I guess is where the energy part comes in. There's this really great sprawling project, and I was involved in just a very small piece of it, which is looking at weather data for this watershed and kind of sub watersheds. I was working with 20 years worth of precipitation and temperature data, trying to establish kind of just kind of populating one part of this model, which it was hard to get initially to get a sense of the whole thing, but over time, as I started talking to more people who were involved with the project, I got a much better sense for a much better lay of the land. And the project, of course, was happening before I got there, and it continued well after. But to play that role over the summer was really fascinating, and I kind of work that I had never done before. And Argonne, of course, was just an amazing place to be, and it was a great experience. And I think it really kind of helped confirm for me that I wanted to work in these areas, kind of at the intersection of energy and the environment. And I think at a time when I was figuring out my career, my path, it was really invaluable.
Great. So we'll do about one or two more questions, then we'll get to student questions. So if you guys and the attendees have questions showing up, you can raise your hands and I'll get to you in just a few minutes or start thinking of your questions. So a little bit about the future and what you see for yourself 5-10 years from now. What do you want to be doing?
That's a very good question, and one I think about a lot. And it's a tough time to be planning out that far ahead. I think right now I'm focusing on just kind of doing the best that I can with what I'm doing right now, making sure the next year or two for me at least is going to be good, that I have more or less of a plan in place there. As far as 5 or 10, 15 years out, I've always really valued flexibility and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. I don't think anybody could have anticipated the circumstances being what they are now, but having flexibility certainly helps. It's one of the reasons why at Harris and at UChicago, I took a pretty wide variety of classes. Even though I did try to drill into some of the topics that I care most about, I made sure I had a good grounding in science. I had policy writing skills that I was working on. Because things like that can be applied in a lot of different situations. So, I could have said, I really want to work on sustainable energy and only taken, courses directly related to that. But that almost would have, I felt would have been too narrowing and too constricting. So I think there are a lot of areas I could end up working in. I would love to keep working with energy and environment. I'm also really passionate about conservation and community involvement in conservation. So that could be if I do have to do a pivot at some point in the future, that could be a really fun path for me. But for now, I'm having a great time at GEM. I think there's a great future for the organization, and I'm sort of getting in at the right point, I hope. And I'm looking forward to seeing where the next few years take us. We've had a lot of really good luck getting connected to other organizations who are using our data, and these are big universities, big think tanks. The funding's coming in really strongly from big brand name funders like the Ford Foundation, Rockefellers, European Climate Fund. So people are recognizing what we're doing. They're interested in the work. I'm seeing a lot of good signs. I'm trying not to I'm trying to kind of keep my head above things and not buy into all the internal propaganda that gets passed around. Because as with any startup culture, there's a lot of kind of personal buy-in that has to happen, but I try to get as much perspective on things as I can and say, all right, is this really what I'm going to be doing for the next 10 years? And I don't know, but I would try. I'd like to try as much as I can to make this work out. But down the road, I think there's a good chance I'll be working in nonprofit program management in some capacity or another. Hopefully with energy, hopefully with the environment. And there's a ton of work that needs to happen. These are issues that are they're just huge changes happening, massive global level change that needs to happen in the next few years. So a ton of opportunity, and I think for everyone on this call is interested, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and it's just kind of a question of where do you see yourself getting involved and where can you best apply your skills.
Great. So then let's open the floor to any attendee questions. So if you do have a question, please raise your hand. I will then unmute you and allow you to talk. A reminder that you do need to accept that unmute to speak, and then I will mute you after you have finished. And please do state your name and your year in school and what program you're in or anything like that, so you know who you are. And if you guys, oh, there we go. So if you're going to be shy, I'm just going to keep talking. So we got one. So Aaron, I'm going to click to allow you to talk.
Hi, yeah, I'm a second year. I'm actually an undergrad right now. Thank you for doing this. I was wondering like what GEM is trying to do in like the future where you're trying to take the organization in general.
All right, thanks, Aaron. Thank you for your question. Yeah, it's like I mentioned, there are other areas we want to get involved in, nuclear, renewables. Part of the trouble is that there are so many other groups out there who are doing such similar and in many cases overlapping work that it's really a matter of, how do we kind of carve out a niche for ourselves that is unique and that isn't being duplicated somewhere else, because we're small, we're kind of scrappy. We can't really compete with some of the big, big NGOs out there, the big research outfits or universities. But what we can do is, lend our skills to sort of unique areas of problems that other people aren't focusing on or don't have time to focus on. And part of being a small scrappy outfit is we have to be a little bit flexible. So we don't always know that far ahead of time what we're going to be working on. We feel a little bit reactive to kind of the I guess you could call it the market that's out there for demand, the demand for energy research. A lot of data, like I mentioned nuclear. It's really easy to find a list of all the operating nuclear power plants in the world because they're so well documented. There are so many regulations and laws that say you have to publish all these facts and make it publicly available knowledge because these are big kind of monolithic pieces of infrastructure, and you can't hide a nuclear power plant. Try as some countries might, and So nuclear is not really an area we can kind of compete, by making a list of, nuclear power plants. That's easy to get anywhere. But what we can do is go in and look at very specific things, things like, looking at the temperature differences in. So nuclear plants need water to cool them down. Many of them do, and in many cases that water is then processed and sent out into local lakes, rivers, reservoirs, the ocean. And you can measure the effects of that and maybe make a database or a catalog or a map of that. So that's one thing we're thinking about. There are other things like that are very sort of niche topics that we can do research into. Renewables is huge because there's just so much happening, being developed live on the ground now. A nuclear power plant takes decades to plan and construct and to get online. Whereas renewables, you can build a solar power, you can build a solar panel today and install it in an array, and in a week you've got a running thing integrated into the grid. So that we can be a lot more nimble on. We can do research faster in many cases than other organizations can, and we can publish faster. And we try to be as efficient and effective as we can. And that's sort of our angle. We don't always know what we're going to be researching a year ahead of time, but we kind of know the general topics we'd like to be more involved with. And in general, we'd love to be more well-rounded. So we really started very heavily focusing on coal, and we sort of specialized in that for the first few years. Now we've invested heavily into branching out into oil and gas. Renewables is probably the next big thing for us. But we also do things like looking at metals manufacturing, aluminum, steel is a big one for us. We have a steel plant track around the world. Things that take a lot of, are big, have big inputs of energy that require a lot of energy to refine steel and to turn it into usable products. So even though that's not energy production, it's a huge consumer of energy, which in turn influences how much energy needs to be available within a geographic area. So very, very general answer, but I hope that's helpful. And yeah, I would definitely encourage everyone to check out the website and see what we've published so far, and even some things pages that don't look quite finished, those are going to be finished soon, and we'll have links up there. And if there are topics that interest you, you can reach out. There's a data request form where you can just write to the program director. All that information is available on the site. And if you're curious, see what's going on.
All right, great. Thank you for your question, Aaron. And I did put in the chat box the link to the website, so you guys can all check that out. Okay. We have a question from Devika. So I'm gonna talk. There we go.
Hi, Joshua. Thank you for sharing your insights with us today. My name is Dave.
We're having a little bit trouble hearing you. Can you try again?
Yeah, new program. I had.
We're having some audio issues. Are you able to submit your question into the Q&A and I'll just read it? Is that okay?
better?
We're having a little bit of audio issues. I'm going to actually put you back on mute, and then if you can put your question into the Q&A, I'll read it out and we'll have Josh answer that question for you. Is that all right?
Sure, unless this is better now. I just changed my connection.
That is better. Yeah, let's
okay,
try that.
Great. Thank you. Yes, I'm in the International Development and Policy Masters here at Harris, and I'd initially wanted to come in for the MS in Environmental Science and Policy, but they don't offer that anymore. So I was wondering, for someone with a non-scientific background in the energy environment space, what is the scope for working in, say, in any of these organizations from a policy perspective, and would taking, say, one, environmental science and policy course cover that gap, like, in your entire selection of courses, would having just one science-based course be enough?
That's a great question. Thank you, Devika. Yeah, you definitely don't have to take science classes to be able to go and work in energy research. I found it kind of personally enriching, and it's just sort of an aspect of this massive topic that I find interesting. But you can definitely focus more on the economic side of things, or more on the public health side of things. There's also still different angles you can take. So I think it really depends where your skills are, where your interests are, and the kind of work you eventually want to or see yourself doing one day. That being said, I think kind of the deeper you get into energy, it is sort of hard to get away from these technical pieces. And even my role now, I don't do a lot of hands-on research. I'm really more on the kind of management and administration side. But I find that it's really helpful to know and have a grasp off the technical side of things, because as we're preparing a budget for a new project we're proposing, or as we're working with a potential funder to get something funded, it's helpful to know, what topics overlap. Where can we draw expertise from? I mentioned the steel program a little while ago. So if we know that coal is really integral to steel production to varying degrees all over the world, then we know we can have our coal staff. We need to have some of their time available in the next 4 to 6 months to be able to work on that project, or we're gonna have to hire somebody new. And these are all things you can also look up after you're already working somewhere. You can I think we should always strive to be students and to learn more and to expand our knowledge base around these topics. But definitely having some grounding on it is better, and there's no better time than while you're at the University of Chicago to take advantage of the opportunities that are there, and to take a class that interests you. And you also have the option to do things like take a class, pass, fail, or just audit it. If you're curious to learn but don't necessarily want to commit to that being a part of your formal academic preparation. I don't think you can be too prepared for any of these jobs. There's like I said, there's a ton of work that needs to be done, and all sorts of angles that need to be approached from. Science is just one of them. It does tend to be pretty well. It tends to be pretty integrated into all these issues, but you don't strictly need it to I think be able to pursue a lot of these jobs.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Okay. We do have a question that came in through the chat box, so I'm going to read that, or through the Q&A. This is from Shashwat Kumar. He says he's a PhD student, and their research involves around electricity regulation in India. In their PhD program, they always have this quantitative versus qualitative debate. So at GEM, when it comes to research, what is valued most between content versus methodology? Because there's always trade-off depending on what methodology we opt for.
Yeah, I mean, I think the type of organization, thanks for your question. The type of organization that GEM tries to be is a very neutral, data-driven group. We like to see ourselves as sort of a reliable citation. So if a news agency is looking to back up something in their article they're writing, they can feel comfortable going to GEM and looking at our database and saying, okay, that's a statistic I believe, and I can see where that's again in sequence cited to, and I can use that. So quantitative work is always the basis of that. We have people say there's 6 coal plants in this region, each of which has X number of units, and that produces a total output of however many gigawatts. And it's a lot of that's kind of on the easier side to, we can populate a spreadsheet with that and make a map in a few days, and that's easy enough. Where the qualitative piece comes in is things like the environmental and human health effects of energy, because there is data out there. You can look at the different incidence of disease rates close to a power plant versus far away from a power plant, how different species are doing, migratory birds, things like that. All that data is out there, but there's going to be sort of an editorial decision and where you draw the line. What's the radius away from the power plant? Do we consider which way the wind blows? Do we how do we really define the parameters of our investigation? So I think it's always good to include more data, but the more data you include, I think the risk is you almost risk sort of adding an editorial spin to it by saying, if we want to add the number of coal mine workers who are suffering from respiratory effects, that's almost making a statement, and we want to be very careful about doing that. Even though they've known about black lung for a century, we still want to present ourselves as this neutral, reliable data partner, and to kind of steer away from that is putting ourselves in a position where a lot of these issues are very political. Unfortunately, I wish it was more of a scientific thing where we would look at the data and the facts and just say, we really know where our energy system needs to go in the next 10, 20 years. We know how to get there. It's just a question of when and where and how much and who will fund it, and focus on those questions rather than kind of the basic science and politicize everything. But that's just me talking. For GEM, yeah, we try to stick with quantitative as much as we can. It's hard to get away from the qualitative stuff. So whenever we do, I think we try to qualify it with a disclaimer or exclude it if it's going to be problematic. So that's the basic answer.
Thank you for that question. I'm going to pause for just a few. So if anyone else would like to raise their hand, now is a great chance. Are you drinking out of a UChicago mug right now?
I brought it out especially for the occasion.
Very nice. All right. Not a lot of hands raising right now, so we'll talk a little bit more. So obviously now, we're in the winter quarter. Those who are going to be graduating soon in the spring are thinking about their futures. Do you have any advice for students for graduating from undergrad, graduating from graduate school? Any wise words of wisdom to offer?
I mean, first of all, I would be a little bit skeptical of anybody at this stage in their career who thinks they have everything figured out, because I definitely don't. I have the benefit of having a few years under my belt now of experience, and I've learned a lot of lessons, but I definitely know there's a lot more that I need to learn as my career evolves. And I think over time you kind of realize how much you don't know, and there's value in that. So whether you're graduating from undergraduate or grad school, try to keep as open in mind as you can, especially now that so much is in flux. There's so much change happening. Already a lot was changing before last year, and now even more is changing. So expect change, expect things to be dynamic. Try to be, people, even if you do want to specialize specifically in one thing, I would have backups in mind, things you could pivot to, or things that are related you could switch to if you have to or if you want to. But there are still very much dream jobs out there, and aim high. Apply for things that you are a long shot for you, because you never know, and all you have to lose is the time it takes to write a cover letter. And the worst that happens is you get rejected. So you have so much to gain. It's such an exciting time, and it doesn't feel like that in the moment. Job applications are super scary, and I'm still terrified thinking about them. But good things come out of it, and I would be excited about that, and try to stay motivated. Don't get discouraged by a few rejections in a row. Stick with it, and try your best.
Awesome. And one thing I didn't get to talk to you about was, at Harris, did you have a mentor, an advisor, or anyone that you worked with that helped you?
I did. So my advisor was Melvin Harris at Harris. Who was just my regular advisor who was assigned when I came to the school. And we had a lot of conversations early on about, I guess I was actually having some second thoughts at that time about the MSESP program, because it was in retrospect, it doesn't seem like that much of a pivot for me, but back then it did feel like a pretty substantial change because I had my undergraduate degree in economics and political science. I'd worked in management and financial consulting and NGOs, so I hadn't really done anything with science. I had no real science experience. I liked science, I was interested in it, and I knew it was necessary to kind of get where I wanted to go, but I had no grounding. So coming into the program, I was scared about that. I didn't really know, could I do this? Is this a reasonable thing for me to attempt to be doing at this point? And I was considering switching out of the MS-ESP program and into the regular master's program, which would involve not taking those science classes. I could still take classes in environmental and energy policy, but it would involve, it would make it harder to go out and feel like I could take those science classes. And Melvin was very encouraging. He said, this is a career move that a lot of people make. It's normal to change, and in fact, to stay in one track for too long, you can risk stagnating once you kind of change things up and learn new things. You can always go on and keep working in economics and keep working in political science, even with a Master of Science degree. So, taking classes is never going to commit you to something. It's never going to kind of constrict you to just one field of work. You can always do what you had been doing. So you're not giving something up by taking those classes or by getting an MS degree versus an MA. So stick with it for now. If you really don't like it, you can switch next year or something. And I ended up sticking with it. I ended up taking those science classes and loving them. And looking back now, I can't believe that I ever had that doubt. But at the time, it was very real. It was very scary because I just moved halfway across the country. I was making a big life decision. It's a huge thing to commit to, and you're committing to something that is going to influence the rest of your life. But you're not locked into it at that point. You're a free agent. You can keep making decisions that will keep influencing the rest of your life. So bear that in mind. I wouldn't put as much weight in that sort of decision as sometimes you feel like you need to at the moment. So that would be my advice.
Okay, I'll pause again if anyone has any last minute questions, burning questions that they have. I'll give just a few, and then we will start wrapping up. Oh, there's something in the Q&A. All right, I will read this. This is from Jeffrey. Jeffrey's a graduating senior at in the college at UChicago. Thank you for sharing your experiences. I'm curious about what GEM reaches out to do or makes its data resources, how GEM reaches out to or makes its data resources out to different kinds of organizations. You mentioned that think tanks and universities utilize your data for research. Can you talk more about how GEM's data is being used on academic research or other types of projects to address the environment issues? Thanks,
sure.
Jeffrey.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Thank you, and congratulations on graduating. So we do prepare different formats of the same data for different types of organizations. When the Associated Press or Reuters needs to go and cite something, oftentimes the reporter will just go into our map, confirm that a power plant is where others have said it is, confirm that its output is what others have said it is, and then check that box and move on. In academic research, people often need to download the entire spreadsheet basically underlying our map. So some of that we make available. If you go into the I think the summary statistics subpages of our project pages, a lot of those are already listed. We put them in public Google Sheets where you can just look at the data and see what's out there. And those are sort of smaller tables describing maybe in a country what's the total length of oil pipeline or something like that. And that we make available. But then for more specific data that we don't really bother to put on our website, we have that, but we just haven't published it. So when people request data that they think we might have, we'll often reply to them, yes, in fact, we do have it, and then we can provide that data free of charge. That's a big part of our mission, is to make things available freely and openly. We believe that energy, I don't think it's that extreme of a belief, but we recognize that energy is a worldwide phenomenon. It affects everyone, and it affects people disproportionately, but we all are ultimately touched by this huge thing. And it's really important to us to make this data open and available to anyone who asks for it. So the people who fund us, the Ford Foundation, Rockefellers, etc., they like that we feel that way. They are on board with us pursuing that mission, which is why we're able to do this work and to make it openly available to the world. for researchers and academics from universities, from other think tanks, doing more kind of involved research on policy, research maybe on the atmospheric effects of energy. That involves data that isn't necessarily as relevant to the public, so they might come to us specifically looking for some data we don't have on the website that we do have in our our back storeroom, and then we can give that to them in whatever format they think is most useful for their research.
All right, great. Any last questions? This is your last chance. Not really. If you really would like to reach out to Josh, you can do that. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, attendees and Josh. We're really glad to have you come back as a past Bartlett Fellow and chat with us and all of the students who are here today. I do want to let you guys know that we do have a full lineup of these events scheduled through the rest of April, or through April, every month. So our next one will be February 11th, featuring Emily Baplich, and she's with West Monroe Partners. So I'm going to put the schedule in the chat so that you guys can see that. And then hopefully you can join us next month and the other months following. So thank you again, Josh. Any last words?
So we are hiring. If not right now, it's not available, just get on our website. But the next few months, we're looking for at least two staff positions. One would be a data visualization specialist who would help us make nice charts and graphs and infographics. The other is a researcher who would specialize in fossil fuel issues in China. So those will be available in the next few months. If you're interested at all, check us out. We'll also post on every job board we can, so you'll hopefully see us one way or another.
Great. You can also send those to me and I'll put them on our job board, and they'll also go in our student newsletter, so you guys won't miss those opportunities. All right, so thank you again. Have a great Wednesday, and that's all for now.